What would you do if your wedding was called off just hours before the ceremony? And what if it was because your fiancé's family mocked your late mother? The day was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. I had spent months planning every detail, from the flowers to the dress, to the food and the guest list. My friends and family were all coming to celebrate with me. After all, I was marrying Jackson, the love of my life. I could see it all in my head, the ceremony, the laughter, the vows, the joy. I had never felt more ready to step into the future. But as life often goes, it had other plans. It started with a phone call. It was strange, really, because I hadn't expected anyone to contact me just before the wedding. Most people were probably busy getting ready for the event or en route to the venue. But the call was from Jenny, Jackson's sister. I could tell something was off from the moment I picked up the phone. Her voice wasn't its usual cheerful self. In fact, there was a noticeable tremor in it, a kind of hesitation. "Emily, there's something you need to know," she began, her tone clipped. "Something you should have been told a while ago." "Jenny, what's going on? Is everything okay?" I asked, already sensing that something wasn't right. There was a long pause before she spoke again, and when she did, her words came out in a rush. "I don't think Jackson's family respects you, Emily. They never have. They've been mocking your mother, your late mother, behind your back." I didn't know how to tell you this before, but you need to know before you marry him. They've made jokes about her passing, and about how, well, let's just say they don't think she was a good person. My heart dropped into my stomach. It felt like the world around me had suddenly stopped. I couldn't breathe for a moment. This was not how the morning was supposed to go. I had dreamed of this day for so long, and now, in the blink of an eye, everything was crumbling. "Wait, what? Are you serious?" My voice was barely above a whisper. "How could they do that? How could they talk about my mom like that?" Jenny's voice wavered. "I know, Emily. I'm so sorry. I don't know why they're doing this. They've been talking about how she was overbearing, how her death was such a relief, and how they could never understand why Jackson was so attached to you. It's just awful." I felt like I was in a daze, as if I was outside of my body, watching the whole thing unfold. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, but one question kept echoing in my head. Why didn't Jackson tell me about this sooner? "I need to talk to Jackson," I said, my voice suddenly shaking. This can't be real." Jenny hesitated before responding. "I don't know if he knows the full extent of it. He's been trying to keep things calm, but I think you need to ask him. Ask him about his family. It's not just jokes, Emily. They've made cruel comments about your mother in front of people, even in front of you. They think she was a burden, and they think you're just a replacement for the life Jackson had before." I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. This wasn't just a wedding mishap. It was a betrayal. It was a reminder that despite all the love Jackson had shown me, despite the promises, there were things deep, hurtful things he hadn't shared. His family, the people who were supposed to be my new family, had hurt me in the most unexpected way. "Thanks for telling me, Jenny," I said, trying to compose myself. "But I need to go. I need to figure this out. Emily." "I really am sorry," she said softly before the line went dead. I stood there for a long moment, staring at my phone. The weight of her words settled heavily on my chest. I had always known that Jackson's family wasn't exactly warm and welcoming, but this was something else entirely. I had never imagined they could stoop so low, so cruelly. And now, I was about to marry into that. I knew that I needed to speak with Jackson right away. The situation was more complicated than just a misunderstanding or a bad joke. If his family had really been making those kinds of comments, it spoke to something deeper, something I couldn't ignore. Could I really marry him knowing this? Could I truly join a family that showed so little respect for me, for my past, for my mother? I took a deep breath and pulled up Jackson's number. My fingers trembled as I dialed, my mind racing with all the questions I wanted to ask him. I needed answers, and I needed them now. "Hey, Babe, Jackson answered, his voice warm and familiar. Are you getting ready? The guests are starting to arrive, and I can't wait to see you walk down the aisle. Jackson, we need to talk. It's important, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a slight tension in his voice. Sure, Emily. What's wrong? Your family, I began, my words feeling like knives as they left my mouth. What's going on with your family? Why did they say those things about my mom? Why didn't you tell me about this? Why didn't you stand up for her? The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. I could hear his breath catching, and then a hesitant sigh. Emily, I didn't know how to bring it up, Jackson admitted, his voice soft. I didn't think it would be this bad. I thought it was just a few bad comments. I never imagined it would go this far. I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes again. I had never felt so alone. The person I was about to marry, the person I thought I could rely on, had failed me in the worst possible way. I can't do this, Jackson, I said, my voice breaking. I can't marry you knowing that your family disrespects me like this, and disrespects my mother. This is not what I imagined my wedding day would be like. I thought we were building a future together, but now I feel like I'm standing on the edge of a cliff. Emily, please, don't, Jackson started, but I couldn't listen anymore. I hung up. The day that was supposed to be the happiest of my life had just taken a sharp, painful turn. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? I had never imagined that my wedding day would unfold like this. The excitement I had felt just hours before, the joy, the anticipation, everything was now replaced by confusion, sadness, and disbelief. I wasn't sure if I was still standing on solid ground or if I had somehow lost my footing in a world that no longer made sense. But before I could process the chaos of the present, I needed to understand how I had gotten here in the first place. Who was I? What brought me to this moment of heartbreak and confusion? My name is Emily Cooper. I was born and raised in a small town in Michigan. Growing up, life was never easy, but it was always full of love. My mother, Lily, was the backbone of our family. She was strong, determined, and always put others before herself. She was the kind of mother who would stay up all night helping me with school projects, baking cookies for the neighborhood, and making sure that no one ever felt alone. But the one thing I admired most about her was her unwavering dedication to family. She taught me that family was everything, that no matter what, you always had each other's backs. It was this very lesson that had guided me through life. I valued loyalty, respect, and love above all else. But there was a tragic moment in my life that tested those beliefs. When I was 23, my mother was diagnosed with cancer. It was an aggressive form of the disease, and no one, not even the doctors, could prepare us for how fast it would take her from me. The last few months of her life were the hardest. I watched my mother, the woman who had always been so strong, grow weak and frail. It was a painful reality to face, and nothing could prepare me for the day she passed away. It felt like the world had stopped spinning, like I had been knocked off my feet and couldn't find my way back up. But the worst part? It wasn't just losing her. It was watching my father, a man who had been her partner for decades, crumble in the face of grief. I had to step up. I had to hold our family together, even though I was just as broken as he was. The pain of losing her was something I would never fully heal from, but over time, I learned to keep moving forward. For my father, for myself, and for the memory of her. That was 3 years ago. In those years, I learned to navigate life without her, to accept the fact that I would never hear her voice again, never feel her warm embrace. But I found a new kind of strength. One that came from the love I carried for her and from the support of the people who were still with me. One of those people was Jackson. Jackson Mills wasn't the kind of guy I thought I'd end up with. He wasn't the bad boy with the leather jacket nor the perfect guy with the picture-perfect life. In fact, when I first met him, he was a little rough around the edges, someone who liked to laugh, had an easygoing attitude, but didn't seem to care much for structure or responsibility. He was charming, no doubt, but I wasn't sure how serious he was about life or about a future. But then he surprised me. I remember the first time we really talked. It was a few months after I had lost my mom. I was at a friend's party, sitting by myself, trying to avoid the laughter and the light-hearted conversations that felt so foreign to me at the time. Jackson came over and sat beside me, and without a word, he just stayed there. For a long time, he didn't try to cheer me up or ask 1,000 questions. He just let me be. And in that silence, something shifted. He understood, without me having to say a word, that I needed someone who wouldn't push me, wouldn't force me to smile. He just offered his presence, and that was enough. Over time, we grew closer. He was patient with me, understanding when I had bad days, and he was there to celebrate the good ones. I could tell that Jackson wasn't just a guy who was good with words. He showed up, even when it was hard. He met my father, my friends, and he always made an effort to make me feel like I mattered. Eventually, we became inseparable. We talked about the future, our plans, our dreams, and how we could build something beautiful together. I thought I had found someone who understood me better than anyone else. He respected my mother's memory and supported me when I needed to mourn. Jackson was everything I had hoped for in a partner. We made each other laugh, we comforted each other in times of grief, and we dreamed about a life together. I thought it was going to be a life filled with love, support, and happiness. When Jackson proposed, I was over the moon. It felt like the culmination of everything we had built together, the love, the shared memories, and the bond that had only grown stronger over time. The day he asked me to marry him, it was as if the world had stopped again, but this time it was for a reason that made sense. This was the beginning of a new chapter in our lives. I thought our wedding would be a celebration of all the good things we had created together. But now, standing in the midst of this chaos, I was forced to face a painful truth. All this time, I thought I was marrying a man who understood the depth of my grief, who respected the woman who had shaped me into who I was. But now, with the words Jenny had said still echoing in my ears, I wasn't sure I knew Jackson at all. Why had he never told me about his family's true feelings? Why had he let me walk into a situation where I could be hurt so deeply? Was this really the life I wanted, one where love was conditional, one where my mother's memory could be ridiculed by the very people I was supposed to join as family? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about a wedding being canceled. This was about trust, respect, and the person I had thought I was going to marry. And as much as I wanted to ignore it, the harsh reality was clear. I couldn't continue down this path without confronting the truth. Jackson's family had crossed a line, but in doing so, they had given me the clarity I needed. I couldn't pretend everything was fine anymore. I had to face the truth, no matter how painful it was. And that truth was that some things, like love and loyalty, were non-negotiable. No matter how much I loved Jackson, I couldn't accept disrespect toward my mother. And I certainly couldn't ignore the fact that his family had shown me exactly that. I just didn't know where to go from here. The hours that followed my conversation with Jackson felt like an eternity. I had gone from the high of excitement, the joy of my wedding day, to an overwhelming sense of betrayal and heartbreak. How could this be happening? How could everything I had dreamed of and planned for come crashing down so suddenly? I spent the rest of the afternoon locked in my room at the venue, trying to make sense of everything. I felt numb. I could still hear the faint hum of voices from outside, guests arriving, family members chatting, the bustle of what should have been a joyful celebration, but I was trapped in my own thoughts, suffocating in them. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's face. I thought about how she had always taught me to fight for what was right, to stand up for those I loved, and to never let anyone disrespect me or my family. But now here I was, about to marry a man whose family had crossed a line so deep that I couldn't ignore it. They had mocked my mother. They had disrespected everything she stood for. And Jackson had done nothing to stop it. The phone in my hand buzzed again. It was Jackson. He had been calling me nonstop, leaving message after message. I had ignored every call up until now. I didn't want to hear his voice. I didn't know what he could say that would fix this. Could any apology make up for the hurt I felt? Could any explanation justify the actions of his family? I reluctantly pressed answer and held the phone to my ear. Jackson's voice was shaky, full of emotion. "Emily, please, can we talk? I know this is a mess, but I want to explain," he begged. I closed my eyes, willing myself not to break down. "Explain?" I repeated, my voice thick with emotion. "What is there to explain, Jackson? Your family mocked my mother, my late mother, and you never told me. How is there anything to explain about that?" "I didn't think they'd go that far. I didn't think they'd make it public," Jackson said, his voice growing more urgent. "I swear to you, Emily, I didn't know how bad it was. I never thought they would be that cruel." "You didn't know?" I laughed bitterly, the sting of his words cutting through me. "Jackson, you're telling me that you didn't know your own family was making cruel jokes about my mother? I was right there in the room with them at family gatherings, and no one said a word to me. Not one person ever told me how they felt." Jackson sighed heavily, frustration evident in his voice. "I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't know how to bring it up. It's been building up for a while, but I just didn't know how to handle it." I shook my head in disbelief. "You didn't know how to handle it? Jackson, this isn't something you handle. This is something you stop. You protect the person you love. You protect the memory of the people they love. And instead of doing that, you let it fester. You let your family talk about my mom like that." There was a long silence, and for a moment, I thought Jackson had hung up. But then he spoke, his voice quieter, almost pleading. "Emily, I love you. I swear I do. But I'm telling you this because I need you to understand my family. They have a hard time accepting change. They're not used to me being with someone like you. They never understood why I chose you, why I stayed with you after everything with your mom. And I didn't know how to make them understand." I could hear the pain in his voice, but it didn't change the fact that his family's actions were unforgivable. His inability to confront them head-on was just as hurtful. It was as if he had allowed their disrespect to seep into our lives, all for the sake of avoiding conflict. But conflict was inevitable when it came to love, especially when love meant standing up for what was right. "I don't want to be a part of a family that makes jokes about the people I love," I said, the words firm and final. "And I don't want to marry someone who can't stand up for me, who can't stand up for the memory of my mother." I heard Jackson's breath hitch, a mixture of disbelief and frustration in his voice. "Please, Emily. I'm begging you. Don't let this be the end of us. We've worked so hard for this. We can work through this together." I closed my eyes and squeezed the phone tight in my hand. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that everything could go back to normal, that we could brush this under the rug and move forward with our lives. But a part of me knew that would be impossible. If I didn't take a stand now, if I didn't set a boundary now, I would never be able to trust him fully again. "I don't know if I can forgive this, Jackson," I said softly, the words breaking my heart. "I don't know if I can marry someone who hasn't been honest with me about the people who are supposed to be his family. You've allowed them to treat me this way, and you've allowed them to disrespect my mom. I don't think I can get past that." There was another long silence. I could hear Jackson's breathing on the other end of the line, heavy and labored. "Emily, please, please don't do this. We can fix this, I swear we can." The desperation in his voice made my heart ache, but I couldn't let that cloud my judgment. I had to think about myself, about my own dignity and peace of mind. "No, Jackson," I said firmly, my voice cold. "This is the end of the road. I need to walk away from this. I need to walk away from you." And with that, I hung up the phone. For a few minutes, I sat there in the silence, listening to my own breath and the chaos of the world outside. It felt like time had stopped, like I was suspended in a space where nothing was real. But as much as it hurt, as much as I had wanted to believe in us, I knew this was the right decision. I couldn't marry someone who didn't respect me, who didn't respect my past, and who couldn't stand up for what was right. Jackson's family had crossed a line, but so had he, and no matter how much I loved him, I couldn't ignore that. I had to let go. The wedding was canceled, but my journey was far from over. The aftermath of the wedding cancellation hit harder than I ever imagined. It wasn't just the end of a relationship, it was the shattering of a dream I had built for myself. The fantasy of walking down the aisle with Jackson, of starting a life together, had evaporated into thin air. The hurt was palpable, and I found myself trapped in a whirlwind of emotions: grief, confusion, and anger. I had just let go of a part of myself, of my vision for the future, and now I was left with nothing but questions. What now? What did I do with this empty space in my heart? I had always believed in love, believed that it could withstand anything, but what I had learned in the past 24 hours was that love, no matter how deep, could not survive without respect, honesty, and loyalty. Jackson may have loved me in his own way, but it wasn't enough to overcome the years of unspoken truths, the family dynamics he had neglected to address, and the betrayal I had felt. For the first time, I realized that I had spent so long focusing on what I thought I wanted, a perfect wedding, a perfect life, that I had neglected to check in with myself. I had allowed myself to ignore the signs, to brush off the small doubts that had crept into my mind over time. I had let the future I envisioned for myself blur the reality of what I was actually living, but now I had to face that reality head-on. After the call with Jackson, I didn't know where to turn. My family was hundreds of miles away, and I couldn't bring myself to face the disappointment in their eyes. My friends were supportive, but I didn't want to burden them with the pain I felt. I needed space. I needed time to clear my head and figure out what my next steps would be. I decided to leave the wedding venue. The extravagant decorations, the cakes, the flowers, they all seemed like cruel reminders of what could have been. I packed a small bag and drove aimlessly, hoping the open road would give me the clarity I so desperately needed. I ended up at a small cabin by the lake, a place I had visited a few times when I needed to disconnect. It was quiet here, peaceful even, and for the first time in days, I could hear my own thoughts without the chaos of the world rushing in. But the silence didn't bring peace. It only magnified the pain. I stood at the edge of the lake, the cool breeze ruffling my hair, and I stared out at the water, trying to gather my thoughts. How had I gotten here? How had everything I thought I knew about love and relationships been so easily ripped apart? A part of me wanted to hate Jackson for what happened, for the way his family treated me, for the way he had failed to stand up for me. But there was another part of me, the part that had loved him so deeply, that couldn't just throw him away without understanding what had gone wrong. What had I missed? Was there something I should have seen sooner? Had I been too naive, too blinded by my own desires to notice the cracks in our relationship? I walked along the shore, my footsteps light on the gravel, each step feeling like a small push toward the answers I was seeking. My mother had always said that we couldn't change the past, but we could always choose how to move forward. And right now, I needed to figure out how to move forward without Jackson. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the water, I thought back to the first time I met him. Jackson had been everything I thought I wanted: fun, adventurous, kind-hearted, but now, in the quiet of this moment, I realized that he hadn't been the man I needed him to be. Not when it mattered most. I had to accept that this wasn't my fault. I had loved him with everything I had, but love wasn't enough to erase the deep-rooted issues within his family, or the silence he had chosen when it came to standing up for me. I had to let go. But that didn't mean I wasn't heartbroken, or that the road ahead would be easy. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of determination. The pain wasn't gone, it wouldn't be gone anytime soon, but I knew I had to begin healing. I had to rediscover who I was outside of the person I had been with Jackson. I couldn't let this define me. I spent the day walking around the cabin, organizing my thoughts and journaling. Writing had always been a form of therapy for me, a way to work through my emotions when I couldn't make sense of them. And so I poured my heart out on paper, every ounce of anger, hurt, and confusion flowing through my pen. It was cathartic, but it also gave me perspective. The more I wrote, the more I realized that this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something new. But as the days passed, I couldn't help but wonder, would I ever truly move on from Jackson? Would the betrayal and hurt eventually fade, or would it haunt me forever? The reality was, I didn't know. What I did know was that I needed to heal, and that healing would take time. I had lost a future that I thought was mine, but in its place, I was finding a new sense of self. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but I wasn't going to let it define me. I was more than my past, more than the woman who had once dreamed of a perfect wedding. I was Emily Cooper, a woman who had lost and loved, who had been hurt, and who was now learning to stand tall again. And with that, I made a promise to myself. I would never settle for less than I deserved. I would never compromise my values or my self-worth for anyone, no matter how much I loved them. The journey ahead would be long, but it would be mine to shape. And I would take every step forward, even if they were small, because every step was one closer to healing, one closer to the life I was meant to live. The weeks after leaving the cabin were a blur. There were moments when the pain from Jackson's betrayal felt like an open wound, fresh and raw, and other times when it seemed to settle into a dull ache in the background of my mind. I had hoped that with time, the wounds would heal, but instead, they only seemed to multiply. There were the constant reminders of what could have been empty wedding invitations, photographs from the engagement, and people who had been eagerly awaiting our big day. Everywhere I looked, I saw fragments of a life that no longer existed. But nothing cut deeper than the emotions that surged every time I thought about Jackson's family. His mother's cruel remarks about my late mother, his sister's judgmental glances, the way his father never even bothered to acknowledge me. They had treated me as if I was beneath them, as if my grief over losing my mother somehow wasn't valid, as if I wasn't worthy of their respect. That was the real betrayal. I could forgive Jackson for his failure to stand up for me. After all, he had grown up in that family, and maybe he didn't know how to break free. But his family? They were adults, and they should have known better. They should have seen my mother's memory for what it was, sacred. They should have respected me, even if they didn't understand me. The anger I had tried to push down now consumed me. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see their faces, mocking, indifferent, cruel. And the worst part was, I still loved Jackson. I wanted to believe in him, in the man he had been when we were alone, in the moments of tenderness he had shown me. But could I truly forgive him for what had happened? I found myself spiraling into confusion. It wasn't just about him. It was about everything. My dreams had been shattered, and I was left questioning my ability to trust anyone again. Was love really enough to make someone see reason? Could I ever truly feel safe in a relationship again, knowing how easy it was for people to let me down? I had always prided myself on being strong, independent, and capable of handling whatever life threw my way. But now I felt weak. I felt betrayed. And most of all, I felt scared. One rainy afternoon, as I sat by the window of my apartment, watching the droplets streak down the glass, I received a message that I wasn't prepared for. It was from Jackson. "I know we're not speaking, but I need to say this to you," the text began. "I've been thinking about everything, and I know I've failed you. I've failed your mom, and I've failed us. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for not standing up for you, for not seeing how much this hurt. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted to at least tell you the truth. My family, they never understood, and I let them get in my head. But that's on me. I love you, Emily, and I always will." I stared at the message, my heart racing. There it was, the apology I had wanted, the recognition of everything I had felt. But did it change anything? Did it erase the pain, the anger, the sense of betrayal that had haunted me for weeks? I didn't know. I couldn't know. My mind was a battlefield. Part of me wanted to believe him. Part of me wanted to run to him, to fall into his arms and pretend none of this had ever happened. But then I remembered the way his mother had sneered at me, the way his sister had mocked my mother's memory with her careless words. And I knew, deep down, that I could never fully trust Jackson again, not until he proved, without a doubt, that he could stand up for me and for us. I didn't respond to the message immediately. Instead, I went for a long walk, letting the cold air clear my mind. I needed space. I needed to hear my own thoughts without the constant pull of emotion. As I walked through the city, I couldn't help but feel like I was on the verge of something that could change the entire course of my life. I had spent so much time focusing on Jackson, on what he wanted, on what our future could be, but now I had to focus on myself. I had to figure out what I wanted, not as his fiancé, not as someone else's daughter, but as Emily Cooper, a woman who had just endured a heartbreak like no other. I found a quiet park and sat on a bench under a tree, letting the world go by. The tension in my chest was heavy, but there was a flicker of something else beneath it, a small spark of hope. Hope that I could still find peace, hope that I could heal from this, hope that my heart could learn to trust again. That was when I saw her. An older woman, maybe in her 60s, walking her dog along the path. She passed by me and stopped, giving me a soft smile. "Are you okay, dear?" she asked, her voice kind, but knowing, like she had seen heartache before. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just thinking." She sat next to me on the bench without asking, her dog lying down at her feet. "You're going through something, aren't you? I can see it in your eyes." My throat tightened, and for a moment, I almost broke down right there in front of a stranger. But I held back, managing to nod again. "I'm just trying to figure it out." She gave a little sigh, like she knew exactly what I was feeling. "You know, dear, sometimes life throws us these huge, painful lessons. And it's hard to see the meaning when we're in the middle of it. But I promise you, one day you'll look back and see how much you've grown, how much stronger you are because of this. It won't make the pain go away, but it will make you realize that you're capable of so much more than you thought." Her words, simple as they were, struck a chord deep within me. I had been so focused on the hurt, so overwhelmed by the injustice of it all, that I had forgotten the one thing that had always driven me forward: resilience. I had survived losses before. I had overcome challenges that seemed impossible at the time. And I could do it again. Maybe, just maybe, this pain was the catalyst for something bigger. Something better. I looked at the woman, her face wrinkled with years of wisdom, and I smiled, genuinely, for the first time in weeks. "Thank you." "You're right." She gave me a wink as she stood up, tugging gently at her dog's leash. "You're welcome, dear. You'll find your way. I know you will." As I watched her walk away, I felt a shift within me. It wasn't a magical transformation, but it was enough to remind me that life would go on. And I would go on with it. I had been given a painful, heart-wrenching lesson, but that lesson was teaching me more than I could have ever expected. It was teaching me to be strong, to trust in myself, and most of all, to trust that no matter what, I could rebuild. And just maybe, in time, I would find love again, not a love that was perfect, but a love that was right. A love that respected me, my past, and everything I had to offer. But for now, I had to let go of Jackson and all the hurt that came with him. The journey to healing had truly begun. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The next few days felt like a fog, strangely numb and unreal. There were moments of clarity when I felt the weight of my decisions and the slow progress I was making, but they were always fleeting, replaced by waves of doubt. I still loved Jackson. I still wanted things to work out. But deep down, I knew they couldn't. Not in the way I had once imagined. Not with the betrayal that had marked the end of what I thought would be my future. I spent the following week in a sort of limbo, unsure of where to go or what to do next. I had left the cabin by the lake and returned to my apartment, where the empty walls seemed to mirror the emptiness I felt inside. At night, I would lie awake in bed, the echoes of Jackson's apology still ringing in my ears. The words he'd sent me had been heartfelt, but they didn't change the reality of what had happened. I needed closure. Not from Jackson, not anymore. I needed closure from myself. I needed to forgive myself for the choices I had made, for the ways I had allowed myself to become so entangled in someone else's life that I had forgotten to take care of my own. That's when I decided to take the most important step of all. I took a break from everything. I booked a flight to visit my family in Chicago, something I had been putting off for far too long. I needed to be around people who knew me, who loved me unconditionally. I needed their support, their strength, to remind me of who I was before Jackson, before all the hurt. When I arrived at my parents' house, the familiar scent of my mom's cooking and the sound of my dad's laughter brought a sense of peace I hadn't realized I was missing. My parents had always been my rock, and being with them now, when I was at my most vulnerable, felt like a warm embrace I didn't know I needed. "How are you, sweetie?" My mom asked me softly, pulling me into a tight hug. "You've been through so much lately." I tried to hold back the tears, but they came anyway. I'm not sure. I thought I knew who I was, but now, everything feels like it's falling apart. She stroked my hair, the same way she had done when I was younger, and whispered, "It's okay to feel lost sometimes, Emily. It's okay to grieve. But don't let this one moment define you. You're so much more than what you're going through right now." I nodded, trying to breathe through the lump in my throat. It was hard to feel okay again, but my mother's words gave me a small sliver of hope. Maybe she was right. Maybe this wasn't the end of the world. Maybe it was just a chapter, one I would learn from and eventually move on from. During my visit, I spent more time with my parents than I had in years. We went on long walks, ate at our favorite diners, and shared stories about the past. Each day, I felt a little more like myself, as if the pieces of who I was before Jackson were starting to return, slowly but surely. I laughed more than I had in months, and with every laugh, I felt a little more free. But it wasn't just my parents who were there for me. My best friend from childhood, Claire, came over one afternoon, and we sat on the porch drinking coffee, talking about everything and nothing at all. Claire had always been the one to call me out when I needed it, and this time was no different. "So," she said, looking at me over her coffee mug, "what's next for you? I know you're still hurting, but when are you going to stop letting Jackson's family dictate your happiness?" I hesitated. "I don't know. I'm still trying to figure that out." "Well, you don't have to figure it out all at once," she said, leaning forward. "But I do know one thing. You're not that girl anymore, the one who used to put everyone else first, even at the expense of your own heart. You're Emily Cooper, and you deserve better than what you got. You deserve someone who respects you, who sees you for the amazing woman you are." Her words hit me like a tidal wave. She was right. Somewhere along the way, I had allowed myself to become lost in Jackson's world, in his family's world. I had forgotten the woman I was before him, the woman who knew her worth and wouldn't settle for less. But now I was finding my way back to her. And I knew that in order to move forward, I had to stop looking back. I had to stop holding on to the past, to the idea of a perfect future with Jackson. That version of myself didn't exist anymore. I spent the rest of my time in Chicago reflecting, journaling, and spending quality time with the people who truly cared about me. I started to see the light at the end of the tunnel, even if it was still faint. It was a journey, one I knew would take time, but I was no longer afraid of it. When I returned to my apartment, things didn't magically change. The silence still loomed, and I still had moments of doubt. But there was something different in me. Something stronger, more resolute. I had learned to put myself first, to value my own happiness over someone else's approval. And as the weeks went on, I started to notice small changes. I began to focus on my career again, to rekindle friendships I had neglected, and to embrace the things that made me happy. I signed up for dance classes, something I had always wanted to do, but had never made time for. I took weekend trips to explore new places, something that filled me with excitement and purpose. I was learning to live for me. One evening, as I sat in the quiet of my apartment, reflecting on how far I had come, I realized that I had finally let go. Not just of Jackson, but of everything that had held me back. I wasn't the same person I was when I first met him. I wasn't the same person I had been on the day of the wedding cancellation. I had changed. I had grown. And as I thought about what came next, I no longer felt the weight of the past holding me down. I was ready to embrace whatever the future held, whether it was love, adventure, or simply the joy of living authentically. I had learned the most important lesson of all: love starts with loving yourself first. As the sun set outside my window, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, I knew that everything was going to be okay. The future was uncertain, yes, but I was ready to face it with strength and hope. And in that moment, I realized that sometimes the end of one chapter is just the beginning of a new one. A better one. A life that was all mine to create. The story wasn't over after all. It had only just begun. The days after I returned from Chicago were filled with a strange mix of excitement and trepidation. It felt as though I had stepped into a new life, one where I was no longer the person I had been when I was with Jackson, but someone new, someone stronger. I felt empowered, but also uncertain about what the future would hold. The idea of moving forward was exhilarating, yet the thought of stepping into unknown territory made me nervous. I threw myself into work, focusing on my career and finding joy in the simple things again. Slowly but surely, the hollow ache that had consumed me after the breakup began to subside. I was rediscovering the woman I had been before Jackson, before the wedding that would never be. It wasn't easy, but it felt like the first true step in healing. One evening, after a long day at work, I decided to take a walk through the park near my apartment. It had become my ritual to clear my mind and give myself time to breathe, to reflect. I had learned the hard way that the past couldn't be erased, but I could shape the future. The park, with its tall trees, soft grass, and quiet paths, offered me the solace I needed. As I walked, I spotted a familiar face, Claire. She was sitting on a bench, sipping from a coffee cup, and as soon as she saw me, she waved enthusiastically. "Emily," she called out, her voice bright and full of life. "How's everything going?" I smiled and walked over to her. "Good, actually. It's been a journey, you know, but I'm getting there." She gave me a knowing look. "I can tell. You seem different. Lighter, maybe?" I laughed softly. "I think I'm finally starting to let go of the weight I was carrying around." Claire raised an eyebrow. "About time. You've been carrying that baggage for way too long." I nodded, sitting next to her. "Yeah, I didn't realize how much it had affected me, but I'm starting to see things more clearly now." We sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, just watching the world go by. The sun was starting to dip below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the park, and for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. "So," Claire said, breaking the silence, "have you thought about dating again?" I blinked, caught off guard by the question. Dating? After everything? The thought hadn't crossed my mind, not seriously anyway. I had just started to regain my independence, and the idea of opening myself up to someone else felt like an impossible leap. "I don't know," I admitted. "It feels too soon, doesn't it?" Claire grinned. "I'm not saying you need to jump into a relationship tomorrow, but you should start thinking about what you want. You deserve to feel loved and appreciated, Emily. You've been through a lot, but that doesn't mean you can't have a future filled with happiness." Her words lingered with me long after I left the park that evening. The thought of dating again, of loving someone else, had always seemed like a distant dream. But maybe Claire was right. Maybe I didn't need to rush it, but I shouldn't shut it out entirely either. I had been so focused on what I had lost that I had forgotten that there were still possibilities ahead. I spent the next few weeks grappling with the idea of dating. I wasn't ready to jump into anything serious, but I thought it might be good to get back out there. I joined a dating app, nothing too serious, just something casual, and started chatting with a few people. There were a couple of dates, and while none of them set my heart racing, I did begin to realize something important. I had learned how to enjoy my own company again. But just when I started feeling comfortable with the idea of exploring new connections, something unexpected happened. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon when I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated for a moment, but then decided to pick it up. "Hello, Emily," came the voice on the other end. It was Jackson. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't heard from him in weeks, and I wasn't sure how I felt about it. "Jackson," I said, surprised by the sudden rush of emotions I felt. "What is it? I know I don't deserve to ask this, but I need to see you. I need to talk to you. Please." There was desperation in his voice, and for a moment, I considered hanging up. But something in me stopped me. "Why now?" I asked, my voice steady but guarded. "After everything, why do you want to talk?" "I've spent weeks thinking about everything. About you, about me, about what we had," he said, his voice breaking. "And I realized that I've never truly apologized for what I did, how I hurt you. I need you to know that I regret everything, and I need to make things right, whatever that looks like." I stayed silent for a moment, processing his words. A part of me wanted to believe him, wanted to hear him say all the right things, but I had learned my lesson. Words were easy. Actions were what mattered. "I'm not sure what talking will do, Jackson," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "I'm not the same person I was when we were together. And I've moved on. I'm in a better place now." "I know," he said quickly. "And I'm not asking you to forgive me right away. Please, let me explain. Let me show you that I've changed." I took a deep breath, still unsure of what to do. It wasn't that I didn't still care for him, because I did, in some small part of me. But the woman I had become didn't need his validation anymore. She didn't need his approval. She didn't need the ghosts of the past to dictate her future. "I don't know if that's a good idea, Jackson," I said softly. "I've spent so long letting your family and your mistakes weigh me down. I'm not sure if I'm ready to reopen that chapter. Not now." "I understand," he said quietly. "I just wanted you to know. That's all. You don't have to decide anything right now." I hung up the phone, feeling a mix of emotions swirling inside me. There was a sense of closure, yes, but also something else, something I wasn't ready to name. I went for a walk after the call, needing to clear my head. As I walked through the quiet streets, I realized something profound. I had been carrying Jackson and his family's mistakes for so long, but now I was ready to let it all go. The past was no longer mine to hold on to. As I made my way back to my apartment, I felt lighter than I had in months. I didn't need Jackson's apology to heal. I didn't need anyone else's approval to move forward. I had come full circle. I was free. And, for the first time in a long while, I knew that my future was in my hands. What happened next was up to me. The weeks that followed felt like a period of deep reflection, a time when I embraced the idea of truly living for myself. I had spent so much time trying to meet the expectations of others, Jackson, his family, the idea of a perfect future, that I had lost sight of my own desires and dreams. But now, with every step I took toward healing, I was reminded that it was time to focus on my own path. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when I felt the urge to fall back into old habits, to long for the comfort of the life I had once planned. It would have been so simple to reach out to Jackson, to let him back in, to pretend that the hurt hadn't happened. But I knew better now. I had worked too hard to reclaim my strength and independence. I had learned the importance of setting boundaries, something I hadn't done before. I realized that in relationships, it wasn't enough to simply love deeply. I had to love and respect myself first. I could no longer allow the past to cloud my judgment or hinder my growth. One evening, after work, I decided to take a small but significant step for myself. I had always wanted to learn how to paint, something I had pushed aside for years. So, I signed up for an art class at the local community center. It wasn't about becoming a master artist, but about rediscovering a passion that had once brought me joy. It was about doing something just for me, something that didn't involve anyone else's expectations or approval. The first class was awkward. My hands were stiff as I gripped the paintbrush, unsure of what I was doing. But there was something liberating about the process, the way the colors flowed onto the canvas, a reflection of my emotions, my thoughts, my rebirth. The more I painted, the more I felt a sense of peace, as if I was slowly reclaiming the pieces of myself that had been lost along the way. It wasn't just painting that helped me heal. I began to focus more on my career, something that had taken a back seat while I had been wrapped up in the drama of my personal life. I had always wanted to climb higher in my field, to be recognized for my work. But somehow, I had put those ambitions aside for a relationship that had ultimately been toxic. Now, it was time to put my energy into building a future for myself, one that was based on my passions, my skills, and my own hard work. I started applying for higher-level positions, determined to push myself beyond my comfort zone. And to my surprise, I landed a job offer that was everything I had wanted, a position that allowed me to work on projects I was passionate about and gave me the space to grow professionally. It was a reminder that my success didn't depend on anyone else's approval or the shadow of a failed relationship. It depended on me. As I threw myself into my new role, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in a long while, I was truly living for myself. And while there were still moments of doubt, moments when I wondered if I had made the right decisions, there was something undeniably freeing about the direction my life was taking. One evening, about a month after I had moved forward from Jackson, I received a text message. It was from my old friend Lila, who I hadn't spoken to in months. "Emily, I know it's been a while, but I've been thinking about you a lot lately. I hope you're doing okay. Would love to catch up soon." I smiled as I read the message, remembering the many afternoons Lila and I had spent together during college. She had always been one of the few people who understood me without judgment. It had been far too long since we had talked. I quickly typed back a response. "Lila, it's been way too long. I'd love to catch up. Let's set something up soon." We arranged to meet for coffee the following weekend, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement. Catching up with Lila meant reconnecting with the version of myself that had existed before all the heartache, before Jackson, before the trauma. She was one of the few people who knew me at my core, and I was eager to see where life had taken her as well. When we met, it felt as though no time had passed. We sat down at a cozy cafe, laughing and reminiscing about old times. Lila had been a supportive friend throughout my relationship with Jackson, though I hadn't realized how much I had shut her out while I was lost in my own world. "How have you been?" she asked, her eyes soft with concern. "I've been thinking about you a lot." "I know it hasn't been easy." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the question, but also a sense of relief that I could finally talk about it openly. "It's been tough," I admitted, "but I'm finally starting to feel like myself again. I've made a lot of changes in my life, and I think it was exactly what I needed." Lila smiled warmly. "You've always been so strong, Emily. I'm glad to hear you're doing better. You deserve to be happy. And don't let anyone make you feel like you don't." Her words were like a balm to my soul. It felt so good to be seen, to be heard, and to have someone remind me of my worth without judgment. It was a conversation I didn't even realize I needed until it happened. It reminded me that I wasn't alone in this journey. There were people who cared about me, who wanted to see me succeed, and who were cheering me on from the sidelines. As we continued to talk, Lila shared her own updates, her career changes, her personal growth, and the exciting adventures she had been on. She had faced her own challenges, but she had emerged stronger on the other side. It was inspiring to see how far we had both come since those days of late-night talks about our dreams and fears. We had grown, we had evolved, and we were each carving out a life that was uniquely ours. By the time we said our goodbyes, I felt lighter. Not because everything was perfect, but because I had realized something important. The people who truly cared about me would always be there. They would support me as I navigated the ups and downs of life. And I wasn't alone in this journey of healing and rediscovery. As I walked home that evening, I reflected on how far I had come. From the emotional turmoil of losing a relationship to the personal growth I had achieved, I was finally starting to see the bigger picture. My life was mine to shape, and I was no longer defined by the mistakes of the past. I wasn't looking for validation from others. I wasn't searching for love to fill the void. Instead, I was learning to fill that space with the love I had for myself. And in that moment, I understood that my future was just beginning. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I was excited to walk it one step at a time on my terms. The last few months had felt like an intense but rewarding journey, one filled with growth, self-discovery, and new beginnings. I had thrown myself into my career and personal interests, rebuilding my life from the ground up. The pain of the past, of Jackson, of his family, and of the broken promises was gradually losing its grip on me. Every day, I was becoming more confident in my decisions, more content with the woman I was becoming. But as life often goes, just when everything seemed to be falling into place, the universe had a way of throwing curveballs that reminded me of how unpredictable the future could be. It happened on a Monday morning, just like any other. I was at work, immersed in a new project that I had poured my heart into. I was finally in a role where I felt challenged, valued, and respected. I was having a productive day, bouncing ideas around with my team when my phone buzzed on the desk. The name on the screen made my heart skip a beat. Jackson. I had been doing my best to move on. I had firmly closed that chapter of my life, but seeing his name still stirred something inside me, something I wasn't entirely prepared to confront. I hesitated for a moment, my finger hovering over the screen. The phone rang twice before I answered. Hello. My voice was calm, but I could feel my pulse quickening. Emily. His voice sounded different, softer, almost broken. I know this is probably the last thing you want to hear from me right now, but I need to tell you something. Please, just hear me out. I swallowed hard. What's going on, Jackson? I've made a huge mistake, he continued, his voice filled with regret. I know I don't deserve a second chance, and I'm not asking for one, but I need to explain something to you, something I should have told you long ago. I could hear the weight in his voice, but I also felt a growing sense of uncertainty. The last time I had spoken to him, I had made it clear that I wasn't interested in reopening old wounds. Why now? What could he possibly want after everything? Jackson, we've already been through this. I've moved on, and I think it's best if we both just leave the past behind us, I said, trying to maintain my composure. I understand, he responded quickly. But this is different. You deserve to know the truth about something. It's important. I was silent for a moment. My curiosity was piqued. He had never been this persistent, not after everything that had happened. I felt a flicker of doubt in the back of my mind. What could be so important that it warranted a call after all this time? All right, I said, reluctantly giving in. What is it? I've been keeping a secret, Jackson admitted, his voice faltering. It's about my family. About my mother. The things she said to you, how she treated you at the wedding. There's something you don't know. Something that changes everything. The tension in the air grew thicker. I hadn't thought about his family in a long time, but when I did, the memories of the wedding came rushing back. His mother's cruel comments, the mocking of my late mother, the way they had dismissed me, as if I was nothing. It had been the breaking point, the moment I had known, without a doubt, that I couldn't go through with the wedding. Jackson, I don't need any more explanations. I've heard enough from your family to last a lifetime, I said, my voice tight with frustration. I don't want to revisit that part of my life. It's over. But his voice became more insistent. Emily, please. Just hear me out. This secret, this one thing. It changes everything you thought you knew. I know it's hard, but you need to understand what really happened. I promise, it's important. My mind raced. What secret could he possibly be talking about? I had already faced so much pain from his family, but a small part of me, the part that still cared, was curious. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Okay, Jackson. I'll hear you out. But this is the last time, understand? I understand, he replied, his voice filled with a mixture of relief and sadness. He took a deep breath before continuing, his words coming out slowly, like they were difficult for him to say. The things my mother said to you, the way she treated you. I need you to know that she was never in control of what happened. It wasn't her decision, Emily. It was mine. I let her dictate everything, but I've regretted it every day. What you didn't know was that my mother. She was trying to push you away, to make you feel like you didn't belong, because she had been keeping a secret of her own. She never wanted me to marry you. The words hung in the air, like an unwelcome truth slowly making its way into the light. I tried to process what he was saying, but it didn't make sense. Wait, I said, my voice shaking. What do you mean? What secret? Emily, my mother, she wasn't just trying to control the wedding. She was hiding something about her own past. Something that involved you, Jackson explained, his tone desperate. She thought if she kept you away from me, from our family, that she could keep the truth buried. But the truth is, your mother was once part of our family. She was involved with my father. I froze. The words struck me like a bolt of lightning, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind raced as I tried to process what Jackson was saying. My mother? Involved with your father. I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. That's impossible. What are you talking about? I know it sounds crazy, but it's true, Jackson said, his voice full of anguish. I didn't know about it until recently, but when I found out, I couldn't believe it either. My mother's past was darker than she ever let on, and she wanted to keep it from you at all costs. I sat back in my chair, my hands trembling. This wasn't just a revelation about Jackson's family, it was about my own. A connection that I had never known existed, a secret that no one had ever mentioned. My heart raced as the weight of his words settled in. What could this mean for me, for everything I had built since the wedding was called off? Jackson, I said, my voice barely audible, you have to be kidding. This can't be true. I swear, Emily, I wouldn't lie about something like this, he replied earnestly. I never wanted you to find out this way, but you deserve to know the truth. I've been struggling with it myself, but I couldn't keep it from you anymore. I felt a mixture of shock, disbelief, and confusion. My mother had been part of his family's past? How was this even possible? The implications of what Jackson had just told me were staggering, and for the first time since all of this began, I didn't know what to believe. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, my voice cold. Because I owe you the truth, Jackson said, his voice steady but filled with regret. And because I need you to understand that everything that happened, everything that went wrong, wasn't entirely because of me or my family. There's a lot more to this story than you think. I didn't know what to think. The truth of what he was saying didn't sink in immediately. But one thing was clear. The past wasn't as simple as I had once believed. There were secrets, so many of them, that had shaped the course of my life, and now it seemed like I was only beginning to uncover them. What did this mean for me? What was I supposed to do with this new information? As Jackson continued to speak, I couldn't help but wonder if my past was finally catching up to me, or if it was time to finally close the door on it once and for all. The days following Jackson's bombshell were nothing short of a whirlwind. My mind couldn't seem to settle, caught between the sheer disbelief of what I'd just heard and the sudden, overwhelming need to uncover more. It felt as though my entire past was being rewritten, piece by piece, in ways I never could have imagined. My mother, the woman I had lost far too soon, now seemed to be connected to a part of Jackson's family I had never known. That night, after our conversation, I sat in my apartment, staring at the walls that had once felt like a sanctuary. The weight of Jackson's words lingered in the air, suffocating me. How could my mother have been involved with his father? It didn't make sense. I had always known my mother's life had been complex, but I had never thought of it in terms of secrets, of hidden ties to people I thought were strangers. I needed answers. I needed to know the truth, not just for my peace of mind, but for the memory of my mother. If there was something in her past that had been deliberately hidden from me, I had a right to know. No matter how painful the truth would be, I knew that it was time to uncover it. The next day, I decided to take the first step. I called my aunt, my mother's sister, who had always been a reliable source of information about our family history. If anyone had the answers, it was her. "Aunt Carla," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to ask you something. It's important." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, followed by a cautious reply. "Of course, sweetheart. What's going on?" I hesitated, gathering my thoughts before I spoke. "Do you know anything about my mother's past? About her relationship with Jackson's family?" I could hear her take a sharp breath, a sound that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "What do you mean, honey? I don't know what you're talking about. Why would you be asking something like that?" I wasn't surprised by her reaction. It was clear that she had been caught off guard. But I also knew that if anyone had information, it would be her. "Jackson called me the other day," I said, carefully choosing my words. "He told me something about my mom and his father. That they had a history. That they were involved." There was silence on the other end for a moment. When Aunt Carla spoke again, her voice was low, almost hesitant. "Emily, your mother never told you about that?" she asked softly. My heart began to race. "No, she never mentioned anything like that." "I don't understand. What's going on?" Another pause. Then, Aunt Carla sighed deeply. "It's a long story, and I've never wanted to burden you with it. But I think you deserve to know the truth now, especially with everything you've been through." I felt a chill run down my spine as I leaned forward, gripping the phone tighter. "What truth?" Aunt Carla exhaled slowly, and then she began to tell me a story I had never expected to hear. "Your mother and Jackson's father, Robert, were once very close. They were involved for a brief time when your mom was in her early 20s. It wasn't something she liked to talk about. She had made a lot of mistakes back then, and Robert was part of that. It wasn't a healthy relationship, Emily. Your mother, she didn't want you to know because it wasn't a part of the life she wanted to build for you. She was trying to protect you from the mistakes she'd made." I sat in stunned silence, trying to process what she was telling me. My mother, the woman I had always admired and looked up to, had once been in a relationship with Robert, Jackson's father? Aunt Carla's voice softened. "Robert was a complicated man, and your mother quickly realized he wasn't someone who could offer her the kind of life she wanted. She ended things with him, and it was never really talked about again. But she always kept an eye on you, Emily. She didn't want that past to haunt you. That's why she kept her distance from Jackson's family. She never wanted you to be dragged into their drama or their secrets." I let her words sink in, my mind racing with 1,000 questions. It was almost as if the story I'd always known about my family had been ripped apart and rewritten in an instant. My mother had kept so much from me, but now I understood why. She was trying to protect me. And yet, in doing so, she had left me in the dark about something so significant. Do you think my mom was trying to protect me from Jackson, too?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Aunt Carla didn't answer right away, and when she did, her voice was heavy with emotion. "I think she tried to protect you from a lot of things, Emily. She didn't want you to repeat her mistakes, and she knew that being involved with Jackson's family would only bring you more pain. Robert's family is full of complications, secrets, and manipulations. Your mother didn't want that for you. And she certainly didn't want you to fall into the same trap she had." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The weight of the revelations was almost too much to bear. My mother's past was so much more tangled than I had ever realized. She had lived with these secrets, and I had been left in the dark, believing a narrative that had been carefully constructed to protect me. But in some ways, it felt as though that protection had also kept me from understanding the truth of who she was and who I was. "Thank you for telling me, Aunt Carla," I said quietly. "I don't know what to do with this information yet, but I'm glad I know." I know this is a lot to take in, Emily, Aunt Carla replied, her voice filled with compassion. Just remember, your mother loved you more than anything. She did what she thought was best for you. I nodded, though she couldn't see me. I know. I always knew that. As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Anger, grief, confusion. But above all, I felt a deep sense of responsibility to my mother's memory and to myself. The truth was out now, and there was no turning back. Jackson had told me the truth, and Aunt Carla had confirmed it. But what did it all mean? And why had Jackson's family tried so hard to keep this information from me? My mind churned with the possibilities, each question leading to another. There was still so much left to uncover, so much that had been hidden from me for years. And now, as the pieces of my past began to fall into place, I realized one undeniable truth. The journey I had thought I'd left behind was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?